me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70 on the Twitter. Usually with me is Alan Medlock, a Medlock1, but we had a little bit of technical difficulties in the fact that I had no power this morning. And by the time we got our power restored, Alan's schedule was busy. He was out doing volleyball as part of his athletic director job. So we were able, because the Cardinal community of podcasters is wide and deep, we were able to tap into one of the new voices from that group, and that is Jake Wood. You'll find him over at Rambling Redbirds over on Spotify. Jake, Woodbat28 on Twitter. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on here, and we can talk, like we said right before we started, a little bit more. I don't know if it's happy or just relieved, because Cardinals just finished up a win against the Dodgers, their first win of the week, after being swept by the Reds and then losing game one last night of this series. And I don't think it relieves all the doom and gloom that's going around. And I think I don't want to cast aspersions. I think that doom and gloom is probably pretty accurate. But anytime they can pull off a win, it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for the fans who felt that sense of like the pressure valve releasing just a little bit, I'd imagine it's almost times 10 inside that clubhouse right now, with guys just like taking a collective exhale and deep breath. And hopefully, optimistically speaking, can become a jumping off point for the team. Like you made reference to, they've really scuffled lately, and it's really good for them to get a win and feel that sense of that high of winning again, and hopefully it becomes contagious and they're able to really build on it.
Yeah. Now, and I don't want to take anything away from this, but they didn't face Tyler Glasnow today like they thought they were going to, right? They faced Bobby Miller, who had an 8 ERA coming into this. I think it might have been a little bit more depressing if they had lost to a pitcher like that. I know that Miller has some talent and is still kind of finding his way, but it's not been his season. It's still, I think, it's a win against the Dodgers, and you're going to be happy about it. But it wasn't necessarily taking on their top level pitchers.
Well, no, and they kind of pulled a real veteran move. At least I believe that Dave Roberts did, and throwing Robleski yesterday, a lefty, and Cardinals notoriously are struggling heavily against left-handed pitching. And so taking all of that into account, you haven't really seen their big guns that you'll probably see from them in the postseason. Are they still projected to start Gavin Stone tomorrow? Is that correct?
I believe Kershaw is supposed to go tomorrow.
Oh, is Kershaw going tomorrow?
That's the last I saw, but let me, I'll check it while you're talking.
I knew coming into the series it was supposed to be what was it? It was supposed to be Glasnow, Kershaw, and then Gavin Stone. And obviously all of that's kind of been thrown into a blender, and you got Robleski yesterday, and then you wound up getting Bobby Miller today because Glasnow went on the IL. And then so I didn't know if they were keeping Stone in game 3, or if, like you said, now they're pivoting back to Kershaw, or how that's going to work.
Yeah, it lists out Kershaw as the starter, which again, if you're going to throw a lefty against the Cardinals, throwing a guy like Curtin Kershaw, it's not a bad one to do, right?
No, for sure.
So yeah, that looks to be the matchup to tomorrow, Kershaw versus Gray, which, on paper looks like a really good matchup. Now, we have seen Sonny Gray struggle a lot over the last, probably 6 weeks, 2 months, maybe, without pulling up his stats. Is that a concern for you? Is that a concern for you going forward for this year, for the rest of that contract? Or is it something that you think eventually he's going to work out of?
I would say when you look at Sonny Gray, he has the foundation of the swing and miss stuff. He has the pitchability, the mound presence. You can tell and the competitive nature and his ability to really prepare and overly prepare for starts. That's a really big thing about him. So when you talk about Sonny Gray, he's really the least of my worries. I know this season or at least relatively lately, he's really struggled with the home run, and his home run to fly ball ratio has really spiked this season. But when you take everything into account, for his past performance, what he's done this season, and the fact that he's still continuing on down this path and he's healthy, I think that is only going to lead to good things. And the fact that he is also an over preparer in some ways, you expect every time he goes into a start, much like Nolan Arenado and his constant tweaking and adjustments and just kind of looking at how to change things just slightly to make them into his favor. I look at Sonny Gray probably in that same vein or ilk of you don't really worry about them because their preparation is top notch. You've seen all season long the swing and miss is top notch. This is the guy that will, if the Cardinals make it, this is the guy that will lead them to the promised land of the postseason. Now, the promised land being, a World Series. You're going to need a lot more behind Sonny Gray to really step up to get you there. But if the bare minimum is to at least get to the playoffs, it's not a bad horse to hitch your cart to.
To get to that promised land has become a lot more problematic, though. The Cardinals have gotten the shovel out this week and dug quite the hole, which, I mean, they were kind of already somewhat in it. But now 10 games behind the Brewers, that kind of, even with 6 games left with Milwaukee, kind of feels like you can write that off now, right? I mean, did some of that, a lot of that is, some of that's the Cardinals struggling. A lot of that is kudos to the Brewers, right? The Brewers have they were kind of piddling along right there at the All-Star, at the trade deadline, where you thought, hey, the Cardinals got within 4 games. They still have 6 with them. That's a feasible. And you blink your eyes and they're up 10. It's pretty incredible what they've put together over the last couple weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. All credit to Pat Murphy and Matt Arnold for just kind of keeping on. When you think about what they've lost over the last calendar year, and the highest paid manager now in Chicago and Craig Counsell, and you also talk about David Stearns, who's kind of been the architect of building up that team. Those guys both move on, and it's just business as usual, bringing in depreciated assets that they turn into dudes who can really help them. You talk about Reese Hoskins, who has got signed to a 1-year deal, and he stepped in and been just about everything they could have needed. You talk about William Contreras. He was kind of thought of as a third catcher down in Atlanta, and they bring him in and he turns himself into an all-star there. Christian Yelich, unfortunately, because of the back, that'll actually be one of the things that I would kind of speak to why I don't necessarily think that the division is completely written off yet. Now, you did mention the red shovel that the Cardinals got out, and I think maybe just a little bit because they won tonight, and I'm feeling just a tad more optimistic. Maybe the Cardinals are just trying to make things more interesting to give us another down the stretch to remember. Now, I don't necessarily want to say we're going to bank on that and that's going to happen, but we've seen it enough in our time, our history, to know that it's not out of the realm of possibility that a team we didn't expect to go anywhere go on a run and do something special.
There's truth to that. I wouldn't get too excited about it. And I do think that it is feasible to think about that in the sense of the wild card. Because we remember 2011, they got far enough behind the Brewers. They didn't make that rally. They rallied in the wild card. And right now, assuming this is up to date, which it looks like it's not, maybe not quite yet, but there are 4 back before this 2 games. I guess it'll be 3.5, depending on what all these other teams do. And that is the other part of that, right? There are 2 teams between them and that last spot. And then you've got the rest of that NL Central, which is right there with them, kind of in that mix. It's, I mean, if you could put together winning a 7-3 over your next 10, I think you've got a lot of chance to make up some ground in the wild card. But I don't know what I don't think we've seen anything out of this team that makes me think they can do that. Um, Against the teams that they're going to be facing, right? They've got another game against the Dodgers. They go and they have Milwaukee. They've got Milwaukee again 6 times over the next month and a half. I know the Yankees are in there, and the Twins are in there, and the Padres. I mean, everybody that's good is in their schedule over the next 6 weeks. It is hard to imagine this team doing that. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but if you were going to say, "Hey, I'm gonna stake my claim on that," they're gonna be able to put a run together. Where would you see that run coming from? What's going to drive that besides Sonny Gray?
Well, you look at the back of the bullpen, and obviously this season, the trio of Helsley, Kittredge, and Romero have all been terrific in spurts. There in May, they were all dominant together. Basically, you got to the 7th inning. If the Cardinals had a lead, the game was over. If we saw Kittredge last night have a little bit of a blow up, but also we saw JoJo come in late, and his stuff looked like it was humming again, like it had in the beginning of the season. And we know that while the Cardinals have been kind of on this losing stretch, the one silver lining I guess you could pull from it would be the fact that those bullpen guys have gotten a little bit more of rest and not so relied upon so heavily. You look at the modern game of baseball, and mixing and matching late in games with dominant relief arms is absolutely one way that you can establish yourself as someone who can make a real claim to a name in the postseason. And I think whenever you have the mix of those 3 guys, and you add a Ryan Fernandez in, who's really generally impressed throughout most of the season. We're seeing a little bit of wear on him, but I think that it may just be arm fatigue from not having pitched this much in his career previously. I also look at another arm like Matthew Liberatore, who has really taken a big step forward this year in the bullpen, and I hope that the Cardinals have officially learned their lesson on that and decide not to continue to go back and forth with him between the rotation, and just allow him to become in a way, an Andrew Miller type weapon. I'm not saying that he will become Andrew Miller, but when you think about, top left-handed prospect who kind of fizzled out as a starter, but really harnessed and honed in his craft as a reliever, and then was able to really be a difference maker, and especially, make a claim to his name in October. I absolutely see that as being, a loose comparison possibility. You think about guys like Kyle Leahy and Chris Roycroft, who both have some interesting stuff. Leahy specifically has kind of been more in the mop-up duty, but that guy has pitched valuable innings for this team this year, and he is a little bit of an unsung hero in my eyes. And then when you look at the offense specifically, the fact that Paul Goldschmidt, even though is down across the board roughly from like career norms, he's still one of your most productive hitters, and he's still producing at an above league average rate. And so even though he's not prime peak Goldschmidt, he's still a highly usable piece, and he's still, a very important piece in the middle of that lineup. And so if the Cardinals are going to go on a run, unquestionably, the 2 things that have to happen is the offense has to take a major step forward, and guys have to start hitting up to their capabilities. And then the bullpen has to just continue to do what it's been doing. And Ollie has to be the master puppeteer and really, put those puppets in the places they're supposed to be when the time comes in the middle of the game, so that they're in the correct lanes, if that makes sense. So he has to absolutely be pushing the right buttons, and they kind of have to, makeshift this thing to the end.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's fair. I mean, if they're going to be doing anything, it feels like they're going to have to, nothing can go wrong. I mean, we talk about margins of error all the time, and they don't have one, right? I mean, that's been the problem with the fact that they got So obliterated, maybe a little harsh, but pretty close. In Cincinnati, I don't think you can see a team that is fighting for their playoff life go into a team that was 3 games behind them and just be uncompetitive, which is pretty much what they were, right? The middle game was a little bit closer, but they got beat, and they got beat with their best pitchers. And I think that's where if you were on the fence, it was a really easy way to fall off of it, right?
Yeah.
That just really hurts. And I think back to, and it's not the same thing, but I think back to 2010 where the Cardinals were, I believe they were in first place, definitely within striking distance, in the end of August. I think it was end of August, beginning of September, and they went on a 10-game, 3-city road trip and went, I don't know, they may have lost all 10 games. I don't think they lost all 10, but it was like 2-8 or something like that. And it basically knocked them out of the race. They never recovered from that. Cincinnati went on to win the division, and Cardinals went home that year. Um, Cincinnati trip wasn't quite like that, but it kind of had that still kind of that impact of, it knocked them under 500. It, it put Cincinnati tied with them in the division. It was very difficult for me, and I've been hesitant on this team for a while now, but it's very difficult for me to see them look like that this late in the season and think that they're going to turn it around.
Well, I would say that the previous series with the Reds really raised some legitimate questions, and I don't think that it extended just to the fan base. I believe that there was probably some at least internal conversations, being at least taking place about what's happening, what's going on, why is this not working out the way that we expected to. And when you look at losing 3 straight to Cincinnati, you lose that one to Kansas City, and then you lost the one to LA, putting that 5-game losing streak together. Up until that point, would you be surprised to find out the Cardinals from the start of July were exactly 500 at 17-17?
No, because this feels like a 500 team, at best,
Which is
unfortunately.
interesting because I like, for the way that the last week has gone, it has felt like they have not played up to expectations for the last month plus. And to see that they were still at 500, I don't know if it made me more optimistic, but it definitely gave me a more sense of like, I guess it hasn't really been as bad as I thought. It does feel more doom and gloom now recently, but it hasn't exactly felt like, Mother's Day to the end of June, the way that, the beginning of July to now has felt.
I mean, I've written about it, I think, at the Substack, at least maybe once. But when you look at their numbers, as when they were, what was it, 14-24 or something like that, right, getting into Mother's Day, 14-27 maybe, they weren't quite that bad. The numbers didn't show it, but they weren't quite that bad. When they went from Mother's Day till beginning of July as the best team in the National League, they weren't really that good. Some of that was who they were playing. Some of that was getting hot at the right time. And so, yeah, I think that it has felt like for a while that they're about a 500 team. And, you look at that run differential, which we talk about all the time. And even if you want to discount, okay, it's negative 60, well, probably negative 61 or something after tonight's game. And if you want to say they're not that bad, I can see that, because I think there was some of that in that early going that kind of piled in there, but they haven't minimized that since then. They've probably been -5, maybe -10 since Mother's Day. I'd have to look, but I'm just guessing. And that's what makes me kind of feel like, they're just not going to be able to put together the kind of run that they need to. I'm often wrong, and so I'd be glad to be wrong this time as well. Um, but you look at what they need. They need good pitching. They need offense to come around. They need to make all the right moves, and I mean, that's a high bar, right? I mean, to try to cover everything is a high bar. And so I don't know. I mean, like I said, hopefully you're right. I know you're running more optimistic than many of us are, and that's a good thing. But it's when you look at it feels like anytime the Cardinals, and it's been a while, right? When was the last time they put more than 3 games wins together? I'd have to look, but they haven't done it very
I
often
believe
this
June
year.
was the last time they did
Yeah,
that.
and they've only done it probably a couple of times this year. That being said, you don't have to. You can win 7 of 10 by win 3, lose 1, win 4, or something of that nature. Um, but we just haven't seen that for a while. And again, if their schedule didn't step up the way it is, I think that would be a little bit more interesting. But not only you're playing good teams, you're playing teams that are in a race that have a lot to play for, and that makes it extra difficult.
Well, and what especially makes that more interesting is that the Cardinals now put themselves basically in playoff mode now.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think of it from that perspective, if they manage to make it into October and they've been playing playoff baseball for a month plus and they're a wild card team, what have we seen the last couple seasons with teams who are scratching and clawing, to use an old Mike Schilt ism? The teams that are scratching and clawing just to get themselves in, and they're playing playoff baseball for an extended period of time, and they get in and they're riding pretty high on just making it. They end up coming out and surprising a few people by what they're able to do. Now, I'm not predicting that the Cardinals are World Series bound right now just because they've been crap the majority of the season, and then they're just going to hope to string together a run and make it all the way to the World Series. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is the best way to characterize what I think about this team would be that basically everything has to go right from this point forward, but you never say never.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, that is fair. I know Only Cards Fans is writing up the day-to-day of the 1964 team, which is exactly the same type of thing. Different scenarios and other things like that, but they made a run that was remarkable. We saw the same thing in 2011, a little bit in 2012 maybe, but not to that extent. It's there, but we remember these runs because they are rare. If they were common, we wouldn't put much emphasis on them. So there's that, and I think you're right. I mean, it's always interesting. We talk about. I think everybody kind of balances this, right? If you're playing playoff baseball, like you said, for 6 weeks, you're right. It can give you, hey, we've been playing like this. We keep doing it. We just have to keep doing it. But there's also the other side of that is it's hard to keep that up, and if you get in, there could be a little bit of a letdown, a little bit of it's going to, hit you at some point in time. Hopefully we get to worry about that, right? Hopefully they get in and we can debate whether they're on going in hot or too hot or who knows. But it does feel like quite a long shot. And honestly, if you're talking to some people now, the question doesn't seem to be whether the Cardinals are going to make the playoffs. The question seems to be whether the Cardinals are going to make it to 500 or stay out of last place in the National League Central, because they're 3 or 2.5 games ahead of the Pirates for that last spot. I know, like I said, you've got your eyes focused on postseason, and so I imagine this is not a concern for you, either one of those. But where do you stand on that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
No, I'm too old to do
Oh,
that.
fair
Basically, where do you stand on? What do you think? Do you think that it's more likely that the Cardinals finish last, or is it more likely that they finish above 500 and still have a run in them?
Gotcha. Okay. Sorry, I wasn't following at first.
It's okay. I was just
I
rambling, so
believe.
that's fine.
Well, now that you mention it, I do too like to ramble, and sometimes I forget the point that I'm trying to make or the direction I'm going. Which I then thought I studiously assigned the title of Rambling Redbirds, and it kind of gives me an out if I don't remember where I'm going. So
Absolutely.
it's just kind of par for the course, and that's what it is. For this team, I think there is too much of a collective talent to finish below 500 and out of the playoffs. Now, we have seen through extended stretches throughout this season that they haven't played to their capability. And all of that is assuming that they do wind up doing so. When you think about what we expected from the offense coming into this season, nobody expected Nolan Arenado to hit for no power. Nobody expected, Alec Burleson to propel himself in a positive way to, one of the most consistent hitters. Not many people, us who follow prospects a lot more, closely, kind of knew that Masyn Winn was kind of primed to be better offensively than what he kind of showed at the end of last year. We could all really see that he was, trying way too hard at the major league level to impress. And this year he's really found his footing and kind of shown and done what he has always done throughout the minor leagues. And he'll struggle a little bit at first, and then he adjusts and he gets better and better. And hopefully, you continue to build on this season and years 2, 3, 4 down the road, and Masyn Winn is, a consistent perennial all-star. When you look at the offense across the board, it has underwhelmed and under produced. So I have some numbers to kind of talk about that. This season, they are 26th with runners in scoring position. Their average ranks 26th out of 30 teams in Major League Baseball. They're hitting 229. And then when you look at OPS, so on base plus slugging, they are 29th in OPS with runners in scoring position. Only the Chicago White Sox are worse this year at 606, and the Cardinals OPS with runners in scoring position is 634. And so there is no world in where we expected the Cardinals to be a 634 OPS team with runners in scoring position. And you think about they have been so consistent at getting players on base and getting them into scoring position. You have to think that eventually the dam is going to break and they're going to start scoring these runs at more of an adjusted normal rate back to career norms. And I know that's asking a lot of, older guys like Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado, Wilson Contreras. It seems like recently Brendan Donovan's at bats are getting a lot better. And so Alec Burleson had kind of been going through a little bit of a downturn. It seems like he's starting to pick it up a little bit, but I also think Burleson, is getting a little overhyped here. I believe he's a terrific platoon bat, but I don't necessarily see him as an everyday type of hitter. And so I think if the players and the pieces are used properly in their proper situations for their proper opportunities, I believe this team has a chance to be more successful than it has been through the previous 4.5 months.
I mean, hopefully we'll see that. You mentioned Masyn Winn, and I want to talk about him just a little bit because he hit another home run tonight. He's hit one in back-to-back games, which brings him to 11 on the season. And you're right. We knew that he was going to hit better than he did last year. I think that was pretty. I mean, I would hope nobody got too concerned about the last little bit of what he did last year. But I don't know that I expected him to have this kind of season this early, right? I could have easily seen this, 3 or 4 years down the road. But the power, the overall game that he's got, to bring in with the fielding and everything like that, it's a shame that the National League rookie class is so strong because he's going to be kind of this afterthought in that, and he really deserves better than that. And it's been pretty amazing to watch him, not only, with what he does on the field, but he's starting to take on, at least for me, and maybe because I'm biased, but he's taking on that face of the franchise role. Like, he's the guy they go talk to. He's the guy that does interviews. He's the guys that, that people are, he's kind of on the camera. And we sometimes talk about face of the franchise as, who's the best player. And I'm not saying he's there, but I also think he's got a flair and, just the overall game that has people attracted to him. And I think he's got a chance to be the standout Cardinal for quite some time.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, I look at Masyn Winn as serving two different masters. So in a way, he serves the youth of the fan base, and that he's got all this charisma, this swagger. You watch him play the game with, like I said, swagger, and he's fun to watch, and he's got the energy, and, they talk about how he's always talking. But I think he also serves the older portion of the fan base who loves watching classic teams with a great defense and the high athleticism and can do everything on the baseball field well. And Jim Hayes interviewed his family last night, and one of the things that I took away from that conversation was the fact that his mom and dad talked about how he's a real thinker. He thinks about things and for long periods of time. And his mom made reference to something that she was talking about. And then Masyn Winn brought up like 2 weeks later that he had just been thinking on for weeks. And she was like, where did that come from? And so when and if he applies that, and I'm sure he is doing it consistently in baseball, if he's doing that and putting that much thought into baseball on an every single day basis, which I fully expect he is doing, then I think that he is so cerebral in a way that will appeal to the older generation of fans who love just watching good, clean baseball, smart baseball IQ, guys who just know what they're doing on the diamond. And then also that pizzazz, that swagger, he hits the ball and he's in your face and he's telling you how good he is. And that appeals to the younger generation of brashness and in your face. And you look across the league and other guys who do that. I'm not saying he's as good as Fernando Tatis Jr., but Fernando Tatis Jr. has a little bit of that swagger in him, that in your faceness. And, Ronald Acuna Jr., same thing. You think about Bryce Harper, same thing. These guys that are more of the newer generation of baseball player have that little bit of, swagger in your faceness that appeals to the younger generation. And I, from my perspective, you can do that, but you got to have the play to back it up. And I think he does. And so I think whenever you characterize him as future face of the franchise, I fully agree with you. I think he has far and away surpassed Jordan Walker, unfortunately. Maybe that's due to some type of mishandling of Walker this year. But Masyn Winn has clearly, far and away, in my opinion, exceeded Jordan Walker in that succession line of next man up when it comes to like face of the franchise. You can hear Masyn Winn's voice on a bunch of TV commercials, and he's on radio commercials, and he's on TV ads, and you see him, and he's very public, and clearly they are pushing him as that next face because he's very available, and you see him out in the public constantly, and so you can clearly tell they're going to put a lot of eggs into that basket.
I'm not one that typically necessarily wants them to lock a player up, because we do see, I think there were probably a lot of people, and I'd have to go back and look, but after Dylan Carlson finished, third in the Rookie of the Year voting in 2020, there were probably a lot of people that thought it would be a good idea to, sign him, get buyout arbitration years, whatever the case may be. We've had a little bit of that discussion with Jordan Walker last year, just even before he had a chance to play, got to get it out of the way. And we see the downsides of that, right? Obviously Dylan Carlson's not in this organization anymore. Jordan Walker is in a limbo situation that I do want to talk about here a little bit. But obviously has not ascended to where we thought he would be at this point in time. So I get the downsides and I get the hesitation, but I think it would not be a bad idea for the Cardinals to at least consider that for Masyn Winn over this last bit, because I think what he's got will age and stick around better because of the overall game. It's not just, based on one aspect or another. I feel like he's a guy that you can lock in, build around, as a guy. And again, I'm a guy that grew up with Ozzie Smith. I'm always biased against for the shortstops that, especially they have good arms. But to me, even more than anybody else on this team, more than Burleson, more than Gorman, more than Walker, it's Winn that seems to be positioned to make sure that a contract extension doesn't blow up in their face. What do you think?
Yeah, so on the topic of a Masyn Winn extension, I would say I'm going to wait 2 years until he's arbitration eligible. There are two things to consider here. One is it takes two to tango, right? And so Masyn also would be the one who would have to want to the extension as well. Obviously, the Cardinals are known for coming in well below market value on their extensions for young players. I'd imagine his agent is going to sit there and tell him, let's wait. I don't see any rush to why we would do it right now. Obviously, Cardinal fans would, and I'm sure the front office would be clamoring at the idea of trying to extend him at such a low rate that it's basically going to be peanuts when it comes to, league average when it comes to average annual value. And then the second thing that to consider is, remember, I'm not saying that he's Tyler O'Neill, but remember after Tyler O'Neill's MVP-esque season that everyone was ready to extend him.
Sure.
Let's same thing with Paul DeYoung. Let's wait and see. Let's let it develop a little bit more. And if that ends up costing the Cardinals 40, 50, 60, 70 million dollars more because they allowed it, then at least you know what you're going to be paying for, right? And so if it's going to cost you a little bit more in the long run, I think we've seen too recently extensions come back to bite them. And so I think I would like the asset, in this case, Masyn Winn, to prove himself across a 2 or 3 year span. And then whenever he does start to make, significant money, well, let's just lock it in. Let's not waste any time. Let's not screw around with any of this arbitration. Let's sit down. Let's talk about a number that's reasonable for you. Let's talk about a number that's reasonable for us, and then we'll see if we can come to an agreement. I don't think that the Cardinals should be jumping at the opportunity. I don't think Masyn Winn should be jumping at it too. It doesn't appear that he's coming from a situation where he is hurting for money. He has a good family, a good background, a good upbringing. So I don't think that money is going to be a major factor for him. I think he might also want to watch and see how this team develops a little bit, because it seems like there's a lot of aging veterans. And yes, there is some young, exciting players coming up behind him as well. If I were the player, I would want to wait a little bit and kind of see how things progress, because you don't want to lock into 6, 7, 8 years on a team that, decides maybe a year down the road they're going to blow it up and go into a rebuild. Now you're stuck playing for a below 500 team year after year, and you could have a chance to in 2 to 3 years at that point go play somewhere else where you have a chance to win. I'm not saying that's going to happen. But it has to be things that have to be considered.
Sure. Yeah, and that's fair. But we have seen what Atlanta has done with their young players and other teams that have tried to lock up their guys kind of early on. What was it? Was the Brewers? They got their center fielder. They signed him to the deal even before the season this year.
Chourio,
Chourio, so he could. And then he started it this year. So I mean, it happens. But you're right. I mean, there are definitely a lot of different ramifications on both sides to think about. But that would be something I would kick around. That being said, it's also going to depend on who's in this front office.
Yep.
And if Mo's coming back for another year, which he has another contract, and that's obviously going to depend. I feel like it's not. When I say it's going to depend on how the Cardinals do this year, it's only because of what Mo might do if the Cardinals finish under. If the Cardinals finish in last place again, I do not think that Bill DeWitt moves John Mozeliak with 1 year left on his contract. They might figure out something. Maybe they give a little bit more power to whoever is going to be his replacement later on. Maybe they change some titles. Mo's going to be still in the organization. But if Mo, especially if he steps away completely or takes on a job, running the pitching lab or whatever the case may be, and Hein Bloom or Michael Gersh or somebody that's not even in the organization takes over, I think that they're probably hesitant to wait. If Mo sticks around for a year, he probably doesn't want to necessarily lock anybody down to any long-term contracts, which would make for an interesting offseason, right? Because it feels like that would mean a lot more of those 1 year deals we saw last year. But that there's a lot of turmoil that will go along with that. Front office has to be probably sorted before anything can happen this winter.
Yeah. So one thing I would mention about, Masyn Winn and the extension talks and waiting for the next potential president of baseball operations to take over before they make that final decision. I will push back slightly only in the fact that if Masyn Winn becomes the player that we all expected him to be, and that's $100 million plus type of player, that's obviously going to require ownership sign off on that. And so it won't necessarily hinge on which president of baseball operations that takes over, it will ultimately come down to ownership say on such a significant investment. And so it could happen this year. It could happen 2 years down the road. You just never know when. But that is something that will obviously require ownership sign off on for such a significant investment.
Oh, yeah, of course. That's true. I just don't think that because of the resources that the Cardinals have and limited aspects of them, I think if Mo stuck around, he would not want to saddle the next person with that kind of contract because they may not want to extend Masyn Winn. It'd be really weird, or they might want to, do that negotiation themselves, I guess, to some degree. I feel like, some people would say, John, if you're going out for your last thing, you throw caution to the wind, you do everything you want to do. But I think Mo's going to have this idea of, not leaving a whole lot of problems for the next person. And that may be, signing 1-year deals and letting Masyn Winn and others not get extended so that, the next regime can decide who they want to adjust on. And like you said, it gives another year for them to see what Masyn Winn looks like, make sure he can do this again. There's a whole lot of different reasons for that. And then we can see what Jordan Walker is going to look like and what that means. But what we're not seeing is what Jordan Walker looks like now. This is, Jordan Walker comes up this week when Matt Carpenter goes on the injured list. And the Cardinals say he's going to be a platoon bat to hit against lefties, even though his splits don't necessarily indicate he needs to. He's just going to be able to help the team that way. And I know that a lot of people kind of thought, okay, they said that about Tommy Pham, and now Tommy Pham plays every day. Cardinals have kind of stuck to this. We're not seeing a lot of Jordan Walker, especially since, there's not a lot of left-handed pitchers, although I'm sure he'll be in the lineup tomorrow against Kershaw, which is just great, isn't it? So what are the Cardinals doing here with Jordan Walker, and does it make any sense to you?
What are the Cardinals doing with Jordan Walker? I have no idea. I have none. It does not make any sense. It is not the correct way to handle the asset, in my opinion. He has reverse splits, so he performs better against right-handed pitching than he does against left-handed pitching. At the end of the day, the team has a need for a right-handed bat against lefties, and I don't know. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but do you assume that Jordan Walker in his limited sample against major league pitching is better against left-handed, pitching than Matt Carpenter, who he's essentially replacing in this situation? Maybe, probably so, but I don't know for sure because Matt Carpenter has a way longer history and track record of facing so many different pitchers and pitch types and what have you. It's kind of hard to say. When you think about a future piece to what you're trying to do in every aspect, in every avenue, in every way, all outlets are calling this guy a top 10 prospect across the board. Baseball America, Prospects Live, MLB Pipeline, you name the outlet, they had Jordan Walker in the top 10. When you think about that type of talent and the fact that they're using him as a platoon bat off the bench at 22 years old, lay those things out and ask yourself, you, even the listener listening to this right now, does that make sense? Should the Cardinals be handling him this way? Because at the end of the day, if he's supposed to be your future, your rock that you build your house upon, what sense does it make to be screwing around with him in a super defined role? Why is he not out there playing every single day? You need that bump in production. And we saw before he got called up, he was on a heater. He was absolutely killing the baseball. And now you've relegated him to playing maybe twice a week at best. That doesn't sound like you're taking the best care of your assets. It doesn't sound like you're putting your franchise in the best future opportunity to succeed. And so from that standpoint, no, I don't understand what the Cardinals are doing. I don't understand what they think is the right way to go about this, because you have another guy in AAA by the name of Lucan Baker, who's absolutely demolishing pitching. I was just listening to our guys, Ben and from Talking Birds.
Ben and Nate.
Ben and Nate. That's it.
You got to be
Yeah.
careful when you're listening to those guys. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
But they brought up some really good numbers, and they were talking about Luke and Baker. They were talking about this topic, and Luke and Baker has like 13 home runs and over an 1100 OPS this season at AAA against left-handed pitching. And at 27 years old, you really don't have, that much invested into what he will be in the future. And while you could be still taking this time to continue develop Jordan Walker to get every day at bats down in AAA, you could easily put Luke and Baker in this situation. And then for the reps that Walker would be taking in the outfield, you could easily give to Burleson or Newt Barr or whomever, Tommy Pham, whatever. You can put those guys out there on the outfield. You have enough guys who can cover the outfield. Donovan is another outfielder. If you need the production against left-handed pitching, you can bring up Luke and Baker to fix or to face left-handed pitching, and everything fits better. But for whatever reason, the Cardinals have slobber drooling down their mouth, and they're trying to fit the square peg in the round hole, and nothing is going the way that it should if you're trying to run a successful franchise.
Yeah, I think I would push a little bit. Luke and Baker is definitely a boomer bust guy at AAA. I was looking at his split just this August. He has 10 hits in August, which means he's hitting 204 for the month. 2 of them are doubles and 5 of them are home runs. If he hits it, it goes away. It goes a ways. He also has 21 strikeouts in that time period. And I know we've had the reports and the discussions and things about how AAA doesn't see the velocity that the major leagues does now, because if anybody that's got any velocity just kind of skips that level. And he's old for the league. I can see a little bit of the hesitation about bringing him up. I do think that they probably should have given him a shot by now. And I don't know why the Cardinals were saying when Matt Carpenter went down that it had to be an outfielder that came up. Especially since they had, 4 or 5 outfielders already with Pham and Newt Barr and Scott and Burleson. So I don't quite get that. And like I said, I can see the hesitation on Baker because I do think it's got a good chance of being just kind of ugly. But you're right. I mean, you're looking for anything that seems to be at least worth a shot before you use your prime prospect in that regard. To take him when he was doing well and then bring him up and just kind of let him sit around. And now he's 1 for 8. I don't know if he played tonight. I didn't look to see. But he's 1 for 8 before tonight, at least. It just feels like, one, it feels a bit like desperation. 2, it just feels like they don't know what they're doing. Because if you're going to have Jordan Walker, you need to play him every day. He's not a guy that, like we've talked about, not only does he not have strong splits, sometimes he has reverse splits on what you're looking for. That being said, when I would really like to see them play him every day. But I'm also of the opinion that we're getting to the point in the season where all of these guys kind of need to play every day, right? They need to play Lars Nootbaar every day and see what they're going to have in him because Lars is struggling and stuff. They need to, maybe give more days off to Paul Goldschmidt and let Alec Burleson play first base. I think there needs to be a little bit of an eye to the future because I know that the Cardinals will tell you that they have to play all these guys because they're trying to make this big run and okay, fine. But, the odds are not good, not in their favor. And I think getting a chance to see what these guys will do will have a better aspect for them than making some futile run that comes up short, like they get eliminated with like a week left, and that's when they start playing Jordan Walker every day and Lars Nootbaar, and they get like a week to 10 days worth of regular reps, and you have no idea how to plan for next year. I think there's a way.
Now that you put it out in the universe, that's exactly what's going to happen.
Probably. I think there's a way to still. I mean, heck, with these guys, if they start hitting, might be better off, right? I mean, you may have a better chance if Jordan Walker and Alec Burleson are playing every day, and Lars Nootbaar plays and figures it out, versus the struggles that we've seen out of Paul Goldschmidt. Although Goldie has hit a little bit better of late, and we've seen a little bit more out of Nolan. But maybe it's time to like Gorman, and we I don't know. Gorman feels like he's playing here and there, and it's still trying to figure that thing out. But I don't know. I mean, it's just so weird to take a guy like Walker and use him like this. But then again, this is the kind of this franchise, right? I mean, it's very early returns, but look what Dolan Carlson's doing in Tampa Bay, right? He has 3 home runs already when he had none in St. Louis this year. He's already kind of, not that it's going to keep going that way, but it still feels like, hey, maybe they've either unlocked something or let him play, or maybe done something that at least gets him into some sort of return. We're seeing that the Cardinals do this all the time. The league is littered with these kind of players, and it makes you wonder, when are they going to figure out that they need to just kind of let these guys cook on their own turf rather than somebody else's?
Yeah. So, this is an interesting topic, because when you look at players across the board that have gone other places and done well and thrived, it tells me 2 things. One, that they, at least to a degree, are able to identify talent. The problem to me is that they're not developing the talent in the way that is necessary or conducive to them being successful here in St. Louis. And so when I think about it from that, point of view, not necessarily about the talent acquisition crew, I have more questions for the people who are in the day-to-day, that are, actively working with the players and refining them and getting them, major league ready. The fact that Dylan Carlson, I don't think anyone is surprised that he's gone on to Tampa Bay and been as successful as he was. It was clear and obvious that for Dylan Carlson and for Tyler O'Neill to kind of jump back to that point, that these guys needed to change the scenery. And I wish that the Cardinals would be more open to the idea of kind of reversing that narrative and looking for change of scenery type players to bring into St. Louis as well. Because I do believe that it can be a 2-way street. I do believe that at least there was a time a long time ago, back in the early 2010s, whenever they would bring in, players that were a little bit more of a cast off from other teams, and they would turn them into useful pieces. And so I think they've kind of gotten away from that, and they've kind of turned into the adverse of that conversation, and they're sending talent out all the time. Now, I think that, like, when you talk about Adolis Garcia specifically, all 30 teams across Major League Baseball gave up on that guy, even the Rangers again. Adolis Garcia made Adolis Garcia, not the Rangers made Adolis Garcia. He had to look himself in the mirror and turn himself into what he has become. When you look at Dylan Carlson, he's just running with an opportunity. Tyler O'Neill running with an opportunity. These guys are going other places, and they're just making the most of a new, fresh start. And that can be a powerful thing. And it's one of the reasons why it works so well here in St. Louis for so long, not only because they had, I guess the front office was willing to take more risks and do more things, but because players with that renewed energy and that renewed opportunity to make something out of a new situation, it can be invigorating. Whenever you move from one area or one house, one area, one state to another, it's a new, fresh start, and you feel that energy. It's newness. It's the world of opportunities in front of you. And so if you can apply real world, real life logic to a kid's game, it's no wonder that these players go on to other places and wind up becoming, what most people thought they were before they even came up to the big leagues. They have that newfound energy, that new opportunity, the new, just newness, and new is exciting.
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely that, and all these guys have different things as well. Right? Tyler O'Neill he always was going to hit like this for the most part if he got to play and got to stay healthy, and he's obviously had some issues in Boston this year staying healthy, but when he has been there, he's been able to hit. I think about Randy Arozarena, and I know Kyle would talk about this even before he got traded, of how Arozarena had to play every winter, and he never got any time off, because by the time he was done with winter ball, he was turning around for spring training. But he had to do that because of the what they were paying minor league players at the time, and trying to support his family. It wasn't until the pandemic, when he basically got a chance to, take a break, work on himself, do some workouts, get stronger, and then became the guy that we saw in Tampa Bay. And, maybe that would have happened in St. Louis with the stoppage that they had. Maybe it wouldn't have. I don't know. But you start looking at, there's not, just one reason for all of these guys. You can't lump them all in the same bucket, but there is that underlying theme of they didn't necessarily get the full chance in St. Louis that maybe they should have. And yeah, I think that, you were there on Podcaster Day when Mo mentioned that Hein Bloom was, basically doing an audit of the organization. And those results are probably in their hands by now, but it feels like to me that part of what you're going to see in any kind of changes, if they apply anything that Bloom put out, which I assume they will do some at least, will be some sort of reevaluation of how they're treating the minors and how they're treating their players, to be able to get the best out of them instead of, running them down and then shipping them down at their lowest market and then watching them bloom somewhere else.
Yeah, so whenever I had Jeff Jones on for my trade deadline preview, and he made reference to the fact that Hein Bloom has his hands in the day-to-day operations as well. He's down there talking to Ollie on a fairly regular basis, and Jeff, honestly, whenever I brought it up, like that it was so shocking, it kind of shocked him to an extent too, that he didn't really realize, because, Hein Bloom's down here talking to Ollie again, like, it just normal regular day. But for the majority of us who don't get to see those daily interactions and know that how heavily invested that Hein Bloom has actually become in the day-to-day operations and having both hands involved, to me, that really speaks volumes of, it seems that he is a clear heir apparent at this point. And not only like he, but also Michael Gersh, as well as probably Randy Flores, when like you mentioned Blogger Day, and he had some very high praise for Randy for some of his drafts. And so he was a little bit more pessimistic about his ability to draft college pitchers, but overall, he seemed to think highly of Randy Flores. And so I think those are probably your three prime candidates who will eventually succeed Mo, whether that maybe be this offseason or next offseason. I believe it'll be one of those three.
I think it's probably true. I think those are definitely your front runners. I do think it's interesting to know. I mean, when Hein Bloom was hired, he was hired as a guy that didn't, his family was in Boston. He wasn't necessarily going to be here constantly. I'm sure he's been in St. Louis quite a bit this winter. Like you said, or the summer, he was talking to Marmol and all those. So he's obviously on site quite a bit. But, is that a situation where he's ready to take over in St. Louis, or if this is kind of a stepping stone for him to be out there on the market for somebody else? We don't know. Hopefully, he's interested in this job, assuming that he's got some good ideas for this. I think it's a possibility they'll cast a net for a little bit wider, but you're right. Those are the guys that, if you're going to put money on it, those are probably one of those three guys are going to be it. And, it's going to be very interesting to see what that era looks like. We kind of, we know what we're going to get out of John Mozeliak and company. So to have a little bit of difference, in a situation where the Cardinals are scuffling, right? I mean, last year was as bad as it was, and this year you look at those run differentials and expected win-loss, and if they were doing it at the expected level, they'd be right about the same spot. It does feel like something needs to give, something needs to change, and I think it'll be fascinating to see what a new voice might bring to this.
Well, and to that topic, I want to caution Cardinal fans from expecting a whole lot of difference and change if one of those three end up taking over. They're all, when you look at Colorado, speaking of Randy Flores, I know some people have talked about Randy Flores. When you look at Colorado and the way that Bill Schmidt runs that, he's a draft and develop type of guy. And so I know that there are at least a fair portion of Cardinal fans who are tired of the be patient and the measured moves and not, fully investing. I don't necessarily think that any of the three guys that take over for Mo will wind up being like a Dave Dombrowski or an AJ Preller type guy who's going to invigorate the fan base and start making and wheeling and dealing and making all these deals, and it's just Mo who's an old stick in the mud. And I think that Mo reflects a conservative owner, and not to necessarily guide this towards like a political discussion, but I believe this franchise is run in a very conservative manner, and I think that Mo reflects that, and the moves and the decisions that the Cardinals make reflect a conservative ideology of how to run their business. And so I believe that they will find continuity, which is another big key word in the Cardinals franchise, and the continuity of people who are already in place, and kind of things will continue on business as usual. Now, from that avenue, can each of these individuals who might probably take over put their own little spin on things, and maybe freshen things up in new ways? Absolutely. And I do think that there is some fatigue from the fan base and just Mo being Mo, and unfortunately, like, for us, you and I, having the opportunity to actually sit in the same room with Mo, he's way more cordial and conversational than he comes across in a lot of his little 2 or 3 minute blurbs that he does that you see on Bally Sports Midwest, where the certain cuts that they pick, he sounds a little more pretentious, like he's looking down his nose at most fans, and he doesn't really come across that way in person, and he's very thoughtful in his answers, and I can understand where a lot of people are probably just fatigued and on the whole Mo experience. And I really think that maybe that's where a lot more of the frustration comes from, is they're just, we've seen this, we've been down this road, we know what this is. It's not going to get any more exciting, any more better. And maybe just hearing it from the same things from a fresh voice might do some good for the franchise.
And I get that, and I think that there's a lot to that for sure. But I do also think that when you look at Bill DeWitt's history, and especially the transition from Jocketty to Mo, right? Jocketty was the go out and get free agents and get the old guys, and try to make this work. And then of course Mo, and by honestly, it was Jeff Ludnow is in his analytics and its approach to things. It created a division in the front office, and I think it'd been very easy for Bill DeWitt to just stick with what Walt Jocketty was doing, but he saw that wasn't going to be sustainable. To be fair, it also was a chance to save money if you want to look at it that way. But he knew that they needed to be able to bring in young talent and to be able to go at it this way. When you look at what these last 2 seasons have been, I think there's a possibility, especially if there are competing visions, that Bill DeWitt might go a different route. That he might try to shift the philosophy again as drastically as he did in 2007. Maybe not. I mean, he's obviously much older than he was then. I don't know how much Bill DeWitt III has a hand in this kind of stuff, especially when you're talking about payrolls and things of that nature. I don't know how much Ballpark Village and other things like that play into this, if at all. There's obviously things that are different on the ground from 2024 to 2007, no doubt, especially extra wild cards and things like that as well. But I do think that this is an organization that does want to win, maybe on their own terms, but does want to win. And if it's starting to look like a rerun of the 70s or the 90s when the Cardinals are just also Rans, I think that Bill DeWitt would want to try to do something to change that. Maybe not. We'll see. I think that whoever he hires to replace Mo when that comes is a significant tell about what he wants to do. I mean, if Michael Gersh gets the job, I think it's a really good chance that that's status quo. If somebody like Hein Bloom or somebody outside the organization gets it, maybe there's some more significant changes coming. But I do agree that they are a very conservative organization, and it served them well. And I think there's a lot to be said for that, because I think fans look at San Diego and the excitement that comes with signing big players and all that stuff. But, and 2 years later, you're turning around and trading them because you haven't done anything. And it's that active roller coaster of trying to determine if you're good or not. I think that would wear on people just as much as what the Cardinals have done would wear on them.
Yeah, and you mentioned San Diego. It's interesting because their market size is very similar to St. Louis. The way they went about building their roster is completely far and away different than the way that the Cardinals have, and obviously fans are going to be frustrated with the way that I phrased this, and obviously them investing in their players obviously comes down to them retaining a smaller margin on their overall how much they make in a year as opposed to what they're spending on talent. You made reference to Ballpark Village, and when we talked to Mo, and he talks about things coming from separate buckets, and I think there is a little bit of fan discrepancy in Bill DeWitt's net worth and what he invests in the team are two different things. And whenever you talk about what Ballpark Village makes in a night, I think they're two separate entities, or at least that's the way they're addressing it or viewing it. And so I think from that vantage point, not everything they're making in Ballpark Village, they're immediately dumping into the roster, if that makes sense.
Sure.
I believe that they look at that as a separate business opportunity, and the Cardinals themselves and gate revenue and vendors and what they're making from those sales and other things of that nature, what they're making inside the ballpark is what they're investing the team into, because that is it is own entity right there. And then whatever Ballpark Village is making and the subsequent, office building next door that they have leases for, whatever they're making in that avenue, that's what they're investing into that, project. I don't think that it all culminates together into one big pile of money that Bill DeWitt's just saying, I'm going to collect it all up and I'm going to dump it right there on the field. I don't think that's the way it is. He's a businessman. He's diversifying his assets, and he's keeping things separate. He owns all those Arby's. Shout out to Kyle for Arby's. It's a delicious place to eat. When you talk about Bill DeWitt and the way that he runs the franchise and his conservative nature, why has he been able to do it for so long? You look at other franchises that are so poorly owned and ran and run into the ground, essentially. It's because he's a smart businessman. It's because he created a smart business model that has been sustainable. And with the help of John Musial, who has, a business and economics degree behind his name, also is very, forward thinking in that aspect. And so fans get super frustrated with talking about money, because at the end of the day, because we as fans spend so much money at the ballpark, we expect, the Cardinals to spend that same, percentage of their revenue. So if we make $500 in a month and we spend or $500 on a paycheck and we spend $350 of that $500 going to a baseball game, we want the Cardinals to spend that same margin of their money that they make into the team. And that's not necessarily the way that works, right? And it just, things are different. And I think that people come at it from such a pessimistic mind view, because the Cardinals don't throw every single dollar they make from every single avenue that they have available to them into the roster and on the field. And that's just not how they operate. And I think that the sooner we're able to have that hard conversation and come to the honest realization that that's the case, I think the better off we are as Cardinal fans. And not necessarily that we should be lowering our expectations, but I believe that the ownership gives the front office and enough money to be competitive on the field. And when you question the play on the field, it should come from the decisions that are being made with that money, not how much money is being invested into the team.
Yeah. I think you're right on, especially on the business side of things. I do think they kind of keep things in their own little silos, and at some point in time, maybe if they need to. But I also think that, as you said, the reason it's worked so well is because they're good businessmen, but it's also because They do have a respect for the fan base. I know a lot of fans may not feel like that at times, but I think when you look at you look at Oakland and you look at some of the other organizations, Pittsburgh, maybe even the White Sox, that the ownership just really doesn't seem to care at all about the product that's on the field. It's just all about bringing in the revenue, or the revenue sharing, or whatever the case may be.
Yep.
I do think that that's not ever been an issue for the DeWitt. So, because I mean, in this market size, I think they could easily become a team that had revenue sharing, right? But they know with the reach of the Cardinals, they know the history of the Cardinals, and they respect that. They've been part of some of that, and so there is some good in that. I mean, not are they the best ownership? I don't know that you go that far. I think that, they have definitely put the limits on that maybe we wouldn't necessarily agree with. But I think in their own way, they try to put out the best product they can. And that's more than you can say for a lot of baseball teams. And, when people spend a lot of time talking about ownership, and people they should sell the team and all that kind of stuff, which is not going to happen, if nothing else, because of the capital gains on the thing. Um, but you don't know what kind of owner you're going to get next, right? You don't know if you're going to get a John Fisher, or are you going to get, whoever took over in Baltimore, which seems to be a
I
good
was going to
ownership
reference
change.
Kansas City whenever Sherman
Yeah,
took over, and now you're
right,
seeing
right,
them take off from that point. So, yeah,
exactly.
you're right. It could go in either direction for sure.
Yep.
But the one thing that with Bill DeWitt is steady and consistent, and um, at least green lights the ability to put a team on the field that can compete on a yearly basis. And whether or not those finances are handled properly, that can be a whole other discussion. But the fact that the ownership gives the front office enough money to operate, even if that money for the most part has already been spoken for, they still have put forth that money. And it's you know you can only take $100 bill so far, right? And if you're being given $100 bill, and in John Mozeliak's perspective, if he's not spending that $100 bill in the proper places and making go as far as it possibly can, then you have to look to that direction, not necessarily is ownership giving them enough money. You can't look at, I know it's kind of an extreme example, but you can't look at Tampa Bay and say, well, it's because they have financial restrictions that they aren't able to compete. They find a different way. You look at Boston, they've trimmed payroll tremendously and they're still competing and they're in a playoff spot right now. You look around the league and the teams with half the payroll the Cardinals have on the field are producing at a better rate. And they've just, over the last decade, they've done it better. And so it's not always about the amount of money, it's how the money is spent properly.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, right? I mean, when you're spending the money on Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, it feels like it's not being spent well.
Torching $44 million to a Steven
Yeah,
Matz.
I mean, and some of that is the restrictions you put on because of Goldschmidt and Arenado. And especially when they're not living up to those contracts, makes it harder too. But yeah, I think that I don't think anybody should be saying much that the ownership should spend more, but they can spend better, and maybe that's what a new voice will bring. Who knows? We will see. The Cardinals do have one more game with the Dodgers, and then the games with Milwaukee, and then before they go to Minnesota for next weekend. Alan should be back with me then. It's been fun talking with Jake, and we'll talk at you next time. For Jake, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Alisea, the second for one, the double play. What a double play by Ozzie Smith. Oh, mercy.